Hello, everyone. Josh Gilliland here, one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks, back again on Saturday to now talk about The Bad Batch with Steve and Christina. How you both doing this evening? Christina, you first.
I'm doing well. I've been following one of my favorite sporting events, or the various tournaments that are going on, and just enjoyed a very interesting South American tournament, and about to watch a European one tomorrow.
Nice. Steve?
Doing well, can't complain. Trying to survive the heat waves, but life's pretty good. So.
Good. Fantastic. Well, let's jump into this episode. And as soon as it started, I was gleeful at the creative choices that they did here, and seeing Ryloth and the Syndulla family. And it's like, okay, the main story was not the Bad Batch. Like, they were a footnote in their own episode, and that was brilliant and creative with what they did. Steve, how'd your kids like it?
They liked it a lot. We were all pretty into it. And they mentioned that I usually ask them before I come on the podcast, is there anything you want me to mention that you liked? And then they said, yes, we actually liked that this episode featured a lot other than the Bad Batch. I mean, they love the Bad Batch. They love all the characters. They want all the toys. But they really liked seeing Hera Syndulla as well, and Chopper, because they really liked Star Wars Rebels. And it's so interesting how the whole universe ties together, the different shows and characters, because in the first episode, we see Kanan, when he's still a Padawan, right when Order 66 happens. Now we see Hera. The two of them at some point will meet and get together and become a formidable fighting duo. It's really cool just seeing the seeds, growing of rebellion, or of the stories that we really enjoyed later on in these episodes now. So that it was a lot of fun. They had a lot of fun. They were disappointed when it ended.
Your reaction?
I was really happy that when I see a spoiler somewhere along the way that says, oh, someone we've seen before, the Star Wars universe is so vast that tells me really nothing. And I went in knowing absolutely nothing about this episode, even though the people were talking about how, this was linking to other Star Wars material, which it makes it a lot of fun to watch. What I really enjoyed this episode quite a bit. I found myself feeling like it ended too soon, which is, I think, the way an episode should end. That there's you want more, you want to find out how it resolves itself, and we ultimately know how it resolves, but that path is going to be fun to follow.
That, and we see a lot of Crosshair in this episode, and we haven't seen him for a while. We also see his vision wasn't impacted by taking an engine to the face, so good for him and the doctors that they have. And we get political intrigue, we get seeds of rebellion, and one of the big legal issues right out of the gate is basically a forced disarmament on Ryloth of everyone who had fought against the Separatist army. This raises a giant Second Amendment issue, and it's complex how they bring it up, because it didn't look like Ryloth had its own standing army, even though they formed basically a militia, because you don't see uniformed service members that fought against the Separatists, but they are using ranks such as general, and maybe that was more honorary, but they did seem to have a command and control style. And instantly, it made me think of Second Amendment rights, because after the American Revolution, or 1812, we didn't disarm everyone. People still had a right to bear arms. And we should get into the exact text of the Second Amendment. But did either of you, see that and want to talk about it?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick.
Well,
It's an interesting issue, but Second Amendment would be implicated if the government were trying to, Congress shall make no law which, abridges the right to bear arms. I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, then, Josh, because it's not clear who or what the Ryloth government is. It appears that we have maybe a couple of tribes or factions, and they united under Syndulla because he was sort of like a popular hero. But we appear to have maybe a couple militias sort of working together. So we have some kind of a guerrilla movement, but it doesn't appear that we actually have a head of state or a formal government. So if there were a formal government for Ryloth and that government as part of a surrender or a treaty with another sovereign, state said that our citizens will surrender all their arms, yes, that would implicate the Second Amendment because the government's now trying to take away the weapons, people's weapons. And, we have to keep in mind also the context behind the Second Amendment. The founding fathers had fought a war against England, and they didn't have a lot of trust for a government at the time. So they wanted there to be this right to have a militia in the face of a tyranny, a perceived tyranny from the British government. So that was the context. Ryloth is coming off something similar. I mean, they've been in a long war. Their citizens are used to war. Asking them to surrender their weapons, that's a really, really big step, as we see in the episode. I don't know, what did the two of you think?
Well, I'll just go over the text of the Second Amendment, and that is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And this seems to be knocking out both elements, that they're knocking out a well-regulated militia as, like thinking in terms of like volunteer firemen who have their own equipment. Or in the early days of, of the country after the Revolution, Articles of Confederation, our army, like, yeah, we did have uniformed soldiers, but we also had people who weren't like in uniform. They were the farmer with a rifle that went to go help fight. Ryloth is very much in that category. And it's really odd for the victors to be the ones to drop their weapons and now have an occupying army. Those would raise red flags for me, going like this. What laws do we have? We have a senator that represents the planet. We don't know how that works, but there's no like head of state that we see. So whatever functional government Ryloth had pre-Clone War doesn't seem to be functioning anymore. Christina, your thoughts?
I was as uneasy about the situation as the citizens of Ryloth were, or appeared to be. It was interesting that they felt like they had no choice. What was interesting also about using familiar people to persuade them with both Cham Syndulla and also, I'm blocking the clone's name, who clearly is going to be important. I'm blanking on his name, to persuade them to surrender their arms. I didn't get the impression that there was a penalty, though, for the surrender of arms. I got the impression that it was more of a voluntary thing, and it was something that they kind of begrudgingly agreed to do because somebody told them that this was the right thing to do. So obviously the Empire felt that it was a mandatory surrender, but I think that they were trying very hard to make it a voluntary thing, so it was easier to pull off than having to deal with, resistance.
Yeah, it's much easier to get people to surrender and just give up their rights, willingly. And which is why this just seems so red flag of, we're used to governing ourselves. We won this war, the clones were supposed to leave. Now there's an empire here. And we're supposed to say, like, oh, we have jobs now working for this empire. Therefore, we should disarm. It seems to be they're surrendering their sovereign state to the empire, and they're being asked to go along with servitude. And that should freak people out, because disarming the military, and like, if we focus more on that aspect of it, that they're being asked to disarm their military, which was mostly citizen soldiers to begin with, that means their fate is no longer in their hands. So they have bigger issues here than, being told, hey, you can't own a anti-tank weapon. Like, we don't want you to have that, because there's no logical reason for someone to have an anti-tank weapon at home. But everyone can still have a blaster, because bad things happen in this universe, and that's a norm. That's fine. But we don't. You could go hunting. There's self-defense. But the war is over. No one needs anti-tank weapons in their backyard. That would be more normal, as opposed to disband your military because the clone army's now here and will take care of you. That sounds more Soviet bloc post World War II than anything good, and being used as, we now have a imperial refinery here with anti-air weapons after the war they just won. So again, red flag should be going up for everyone. And it's nice to see, I believe his name is Hauser again. And even if he's still got his chip, he's having a really hard time with what's going on. It's like, that's a kid. Like, this ain't right. Like, what's happening here is really bugging me on a fundamental level. So he doesn't seem to be fanatical, unlike other clones that we've seen. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if an older clone, like, it just didn't work on him. But it's fascinating to see that he is showing a lot of free will and personality. And you both just came off mute. Who wants to go first on that one?
Well, he's also older. There was a pretty big emphasis to make sure that the gray in his hair was evidence. So, he was probably more experienced, and also maybe earlier off the line. And it also is unclear exactly how the chips work. From my interpretation, it was more about Order 66 than anything else, not necessarily the rest of being a soldier, because all of that's already embedded into them. So the things that made the clones particularly good was that they were very good soldiers, but they also were able to think for themselves. And they were better than droids in that they were able to solve problems and establish relationships and all that fun stuff. And that made him probably very, very good for working with Ryloth and with the Twi'leks. And it makes for really, really bad for being part of a fascist regime where his orders are not particularly in congruence with his skill sets.
Yeah, it's fascinating watching what's happening on Ryloth, because you can imagine that what is happening on Ryloth is happening across 100 or 1,000 other systems. You've got the clone army that has been trying to help people. I mean, we've been cheering for the clone army during years of the Clone Wars, but they're under new management now. And what's going to happen? And it was interesting to me to see that we are still seeing clone soldiers. The stormtroopers haven't taken over everywhere yet. And that's part of what Syndulla cites when he says, hey, the clone troopers fought on our side. They've earned our trust. So let's trust them for this next step now. These terms are thrown around a lot following war. We won the war, but let's also win the peace, right? What do you do now when there is supposedly peace? Syndulla is clearly a very skilled commander, a skilled soldier. But I think that the point he raises with the crowd, and at first the Imperials are not sure what he's going to say. He could rile up the crowd and start a riot, and there it goes. Here's a new rebellion right now, another war. But instead, he pleads for calm. He tries to look beyond himself. He looks at the big picture and says, hey, we've been at war for a long time. It's time to stop now. Let's rebuild our planet, our lives, and rebuild things. So, that message, I think, is a very fair point, regardless of which side of the spectrum you're on here, or how extremist a person is in that crowd. I think a lot of people at that point do want peace, and you want to believe that this new empire is going to be helpful or benevolent or whatnot. So we're seeing just some really interesting power struggles. And then we were mentioning no head of state for Ryloth, but there is that senator. And he sure looks like someone we've seen before in some of the live action movies. And so I think he seems to represent a lot of the corruption and waste of the old republic that was probably used as an argument against some of the excesses of the past. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, is he like the last living elected leader? Like, did the government get wiped out except for the guy who was going to the Galactic Senate? And that's it. Like, everything, like, so there's no executive branch on the planet. It's leadership by default. And talk about no plan for continuity of government. Well, that also presumes that there's somebody left. If they got hit hard in the Clone Wars, and we have seen him before, we've seen him in the Clone Wars, and he was kind of that corrupt, ineffective looking charlatan in the past. And there was problems with Syndulla going like, you're a schmuck. Like, I don't trust you. Like, you're about you and not about our people. That's a problem. But he looks like de facto head of state, which again is just weird because senators don't have executive power. But this is post-war, and they might be learning to function again. And if the empire is filling that vacuum, or unofficial leaders who have influence, who can get people to lead by influence, there's a lot to be said for that. And Syndulla falls into that category. We'd be curious to see what kind of planning meeting they had prior to the big speech to get people on board with turning over their weapons and going like, hey, you're all getting jobs now working for this brand new empire. Don't be afraid because their name is Empire. Like, it's all going to be fine. It's all going to be super fine. So a lot there that you need more than a blaster to take on the Empire. And you need more. So this did highlight the problems in transitioning from war to peace. Like, we've seen that in our own economy after World War I and World War II, with not having a recession or a depression after the war because there's tons of government spending. Industry shifts over to wartime production. They're not making cars, they're making airplanes and tanks. And to go back to a peacetime economy can be problematic. Also, you have a bunch of people who served in the military that now need to go back to civilian life.
Right.
This is different because it didn't look like a professional military as we've seen. It looked more American Revolutionary, or like North Vietnam. It's the farmer with a 100-year-old rifle that
Right.
taking a shot at an A6. Like it's something like in that category, and that's just different. It's just very different than current history, with maybe the exception of the Balkans. So, or a couple others. Go on, Christina.
Well, it's possible that the empire was starting with a less organized civilization early because they were easier to subdue than, they didn't get to Lethal for another 14, 15 years at this level. Obviously, the empire was at Lethal later on down the line, but not in a way that it was really subjugating the people and building their factories and stuff like that. And so, and Lethal seemed to be much more organized in terms of having government and stuff like that. There was a governor. There was a former governor who was considered to be a menace, but because Ryloth didn't have that sort of structure to have to fight, then it was easier to establish a stronghold here as one of the first places. And there are probably a lot of other places that are tooling along thinking everything's normal because the empire isn't choosing to go after those places yet. They want to establish themselves in places where it's easier.
Not on Krylia that we've seen with gusto, because we've seen a preview of that looked very self-governed, and they had their own robot police force. And it makes sense to go to a place that's decimated. If you look at, say, World War II comparisons, again, think Western or Eastern Europe, and if you're getting people jobs and feeding them, they're not doing a Marshall Plan. They're doing what the Soviet Union did, and that model is easier to take over if there's no organized government to go, you're stepping on our people's rights you're going to confiscate the weapons and everyone's going to end up working in your war machine. Sure, we're on board with that as long as we're fed and taken care of. Yeah, it's more insidious that way. And the analogy to Lethal with taking on an organized system, they would do that later after they've built up more of their military. And they also, just from a management perspective, they can't grow too quickly because then their supply lines are stretched, and they just can't. We'll go bum them into submission. You can't do that across the entire galaxy at once. Like, they're not big enough to do that yet. So they got to leapfrog from system to system. At least that's what I think they would be doing.
Yeah. One other thought here, just talking about the right to defend oneself, planet-wide, really. Ryloth may be a uniquely well-suited situation to portray some of the struggles that are happening now post-war, because you have a lot of struggle between the old and the new, and you have a planet where the people have been fighting, it seems, nonstop for their freedom for a long time. They don't really have much reason to trust outsiders. That's why they carry weapons. They count on each other. And to ask them to give up their weapons, that's a pretty big ask. And yet, I think it's a testament to how much faith they have in Syndulla that they're willing to do so at his word, at his direction. But they also are very quick to pick up weapons again the moment they think that there is a threat. So this is almost a unique powder keg where you've got a somewhat militaristic or guerrilla warfare, people who are ready to fight, who have been fighting, and they're ready to continue the fight if they have to. The enemy may have changed, the name, enemy or the name of the enemy may have changed, but the fight is somewhat similar perhaps for them. So this may be some of the start of the rebellion. It may start on Ryloth.
And not to bring in a Vietnam example again, but I will. They took on the French, then the United States, and then China. So, like, there were Vietnam wars, and the Ryloth, I think, falls into that category that they're used to being freedom fighters because somebody's involved in their country, or
Look at Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Or Mandalore, to use Star Wars example.
Yeah.
Exactly. There are places on Earth that have had long conflicts over and over and over again, and yeah, a lot there, and I'm curious how conscious the writers were of that when they decided to tell this story. We get to see Harris Dula, and she's teenager-ish and looks about the same age as Kanan, so I'm glad that's not creepy. And she's trespassing in a restricted zone, and we have military bases or oil refineries. We have restricted areas where it's like, this is not for sightseeing. When all those crazy folks decided, let's go storm Area 51, that didn't work out well for them. Like there was a reason why, sure, it's in the middle of the desert and purposely hard to get to, but no. But try to get close to the Shell oil refinery and you're not. Try to get close to a military base, you're not, because we don't want people interfering in places that could have a mass casualty event, cause a disaster, or state security requires it. So, now granted, I'm not sure what that refinery plant's doing. Do either of you want to share in on that military base and what it means? Take it away, Christina. I see movement. I see a smile.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute. I find it really interesting that Hera, when she got caught, was actually doing what she said she was doing, which was just kind of, enjoying life and and staring at the sky. So
being a kid, right?
Yeah, being a kid. So, I think that she had the best cover of anybody to do that sort of thing because of her youth and fortunately for her, she got caught at the right time. But it also is a stupid kid thing to do. I think that the history and many parents' nightmares are replete with their kid getting caught someplace where they weren't supposed to be for the sole purpose of being someplace that they weren't supposed to be. And sometimes it's someplace that is extraordinarily dangerous and they're not supposed to be there because it's dangerous. Sometimes it's because they are, very rarely is it because they're spying for their quasi-government / uncle. But the Empire was totally appropriate in apprehending her and fortunately just sending her home to her parents, which I think is what most authorities would do under those circumstances, especially what she was doing when she got caught. It was fortuitous on her part that she got caught the way that she did, because it was totally appropriate. It would have been appropriate regardless of if it was the Empire or if it was the rebellion or if it was the New Republic or somebody that was good. If you're someplace that you're not supposed to be and you get caught, A, you get kicked out for immediately, and B, you get hauled in front of the authorities. And in that particular instance, the authority was her dad.
It wasn't, one thing if she had binoculars and was taking notes, like that would have had a very different ending if it looked like she was engaged in espionage. She's just hanging out with her robot, looking at birds, daydreaming. That seems to be, it's probably why she wasn't stunned, and it's like, okay, kid hanging out, probably used to doing this. We can't have this anymore. And again, you have the clone who fought with, dad, say like, hey, I don't want to report this. This ain't right. And, talk to your kid, please. And that makes sense. I do find it curious that it's the mom who's more hands-on with this ain't okay. Tell me everything that you saw. So with, she's definitely the daughter of her parents. You can tell the qualities that she has from both of them. And yeah, it's good stuff. That brings up, oh, go on.
Just really quick on the factory, it would all be speculation, but I think there's something sinister going on, and it's certainly not what the people of Ryloth were expecting. And there's a callback here too, a little bit, when we were talking about Syndulla talking to Hera, like, oh, you remind me so much of me at your age, at that age. You remember in Star Wars Rebels when they actually do come back to Ryloth, and she's kind of estranged from her father at that point, even though they're very close at this point in time. And Kanan, gets all nervous and says, "Oh, hey, is my shirt tucked in? Do I look presentable? Oh, okay." It's like very charming at that point. They care very much what General Syndulla thinks about them.
Absolutely. So, absolutely. Which brings us to the next issue of arms smuggling. So, you want to build an army. They're not being super smart on the timing of the concept of let's lay low. Also, they might not be trying to, they don't want to wait for anything, that they're doing this quickly on their own. So, but they decide to contract out with Sid to get weapons. I don't know if the weapons are the ones from the Jedi cruiser, but they're doing some arms smuggling, which is problematic. Steve, do you want to jump in on the problems with gun running? Just not a good way to make.
I mean, there's so many. There are a lot of risks, supplying arms and being an arms dealer. And here, Sid, unsurprisingly, is in the arms dealing business. That there certainly are real world analogies we could talk about, and there's a lot of international politics involved in treaties and business relationships, and one country sells to another and a third country may be upset about that. There are a lot of geopolitical angles, to look at when we're talking about something like this. Sid is more of a business person. She doesn't appear to have a lot of politics, and she probably would have to be pretty neutral because she just wants whatever is good for business. At this point, we don't know if she's particularly sympathetic to the Ryloth cause or not. But gun running, it's going to be fraught with a lot of risks. At some point, if you deal enough weapons, you're bound to upset the wrong person who may want to shut you down. And I think we're seeing some hints of that here already. Unbeknownst to the Bad Batch, Crosshair was on Ryloth with a number of troops. It's not hard to imagine that their paths are going to cross at some point. And maybe it's because of this. Sid having the Bad Batch run weapons to supply the rebels of Ryloth. That goes against what the Empire was trying to do, which was disarm Ryloth. So arms dealing, I think if we look at real world situations, it's risky. There are a lot of things to think about, but it can be very lucrative as well. That's why people do it. So Sid's likely making a lot of money here.
They're spending money to do this, so I'm not sure they have the cash flow to,
right,
as the recently liberated planet, to throw down that type of cash. But they do. So, Christina, any further thoughts on that?
Well, it seems to me that it would have been a lot easier just to hold on to and not disclose weapons than it would have been to import new weapons. Because it didn't look like they were going house to house and searching high and low for. It seemed like a completely and totally voluntary sort of thing where everybody just kind of brought their rifles and threw them into the pit. And if I were planning a clandestine sort of situation, I'd be much more risk adverse and looking towards stashing weapons we already had than having to go and get new ones, and going through all the risks. It also seemed like they're not very good at this, the Twi'leks at this point, and which is somewhat surprising given how long they've been at war. But sneaking off the planet immediately after something like this, where the Empire was clearly already suspicious, didn't seem like the wisest of moves. And also not letting Hera know what they were doing, and in implicating her in a scheme like this, seemed pretty low as well. Bringing your niece along to a gun deal just puts her in danger in a lot of ways, not just the legal danger that she's in, but also, dealing with people that you don't know, and then ultimately the physical danger that she was in later.
Agreed. Which then brings us to what happens afterwards, that when they get caught, and it's all a giant setup. So the Empire is getting really good at manipulation, which shouldn't be surprising given Palpatine. However, Chomper freaking out that the three of them had been convicted without a trial of treason. It's like guilty by arrest. Red flag that system is not just. Having the plan to go raid an Imperial transport, also hands-on problem solving that we really would attribute to a state of war, not a place in a state of peace. And that's some pretty serious self-help, because it highlights there are no courts, there aren't lawyers on this planet, because that's pretty extreme. And they don't call the lawyer, they go get the rifles instead. And there really shouldn't either of you have anything to add to that, with that kind of problem.
Once again, we have an opportunity for, but we do not see much of a Star Wars trial. And this really speaks to the fact that there's a breakdown here in the system of laws and the system of government. General Syndulla knows immediately that they're not going to reach their destination, so he and his freedom fighters need to rescue Hera immediately. And that's very much, no one has any trust in the system. No one thinks that, there's going to be a trial, there's going to be due process, there's going to be some time to get to the truth and the facts. No, it's all like just summarily decided, and people have to take quick action because nobody trusts that the right thing will be done. So everyone takes the law into their own hands. There really isn't a place. This is not a place right now of laws or freedom or anything like that.
What I find interesting is that the Twi'leks have figured that out pretty quickly. I think a lot of other civilizations are going to struggle with that because they're used to laws, they're used to processes that help you out and don't have to resort to taking matters into their own hands on the regular basis. So, where they were disadvantaged in that they had no central government to fight this whole idea of a factory being put on that they don't know anything about and that kind of thing, they are advantaged in that they can pick up on every man for himself, or every Twi'lek for themselves immediately, because of the kind of frontier sort of environment that they've been living in entirely, based on clans and stuff like that. So, it is, I guess, an advantage that they were able to pick up very, very quickly. We are in serious trouble, and the only people who can get us out of it is us. We can't, do what the Nabooans did and petition to the Senate or, that sort of things to try to do. And that's what people with laws in place generally do.
Yeah, so I think that kind of harkens back to the powder keg idea that Ryloth is maybe uniquely suited to be the start or starting places of the rebellion against the Empire. Their people don't trust anyone for good reason.
We've also learned that if you kill a kid's parents, that's going to drive them into the rebellion pretty quickly. And we don't know all of Hera's backstory with that. And this is also Tromper without PTSD, despite the fact that, like it was in the Clone Wars where he was in that crashed Y-Wing. So, because he sounds less grumpy in this. So there's the 15 years that have follow up into the Rebels. He goes through changes, and we're going to get a good preview of what happens with that. But there's a lot to be said here for what's going on with this. So raiding an Imperial transport to try to liberate one's kid, that's extra legal, but clearly there's no laws being followed here. And this looks more like state of war than a state of peace. Then with the reveal, we find out that the plan was just to frame General Syndulla, take him off the playing field as a threat to the Empire by discrediting him. And they murder Ta in order to do so. So again, very much ends justify the means with these guys. Were either of you surprised by that?
It was very Machiavellian, huh?
Yeah.
I just assumed it was going to be Hera's mom because I know that she died when Hera was young. But I guess we're going to hold on to her for a while. There's a lot of Hera's backstory that we have an inkling of, but so I was a little taken aback because I was prejudging who it was going to be. Very interesting to see what goes forward. Like I said, I was very, very excited about this episode and didn't want it to end and kept on wanting to go on. So, and the other things were that the animation was unbelievable. There were some scenes where my husband and I both paused to look at a sunset because it was just so perfectly rendered. And also Vanessa Marshall did Hera's voice, which is, I think, awesome. So she was able to modulate her voice in such a way to do a young Hera, which I think is just really, really neat. But I'm always very impressed with the voice actors in Star Wars properties. So
I did not I thought it was a different actress.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
she sounds young.
Yeah, so, she did a great job.
Wow, good for her. So super impressive. Well done.
Yeah, and to her credit too, the character's credit of Hera's mom, she's the one that stopped General Syndulla from summarily executing the senator. And she said, not like this, not now, because they want to set an example for law and order and having some rule of law. Unfortunately, they walk into the trap then that the Empire springs for them.
Yeah, I agree with Christina's summation that they're not good at this. Like they were too impatient to go, let's go get weapons right now, despite the fact with everything going on. It's like, learn to lay low. Don't, and only that, to have the top people go out and go do a gun run is, again, not smart, because now the top people are the ones getting arrested. So yeah, not the best plan. But we do get to see a young Hera interact with Omega. So now the question is, how much time will Hera get to spend with the Bad Batch when she calls them for help? That's the question that we now get to see. And because that's got to be the play here for calling in the A-Team for help. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. And if we get to see a few episodes with Hera on the Havoc Marauder for a while, making friends and learning how to fly. So anyway, fun episode. highly enjoyed this. And as soon as it started and I saw, it's like they went to Ryloth. Okay, we're going there. So that's how you do a prequel and do appropriate fan service in seeing, a 15 years younger Chopper, and a, what, 14-year-old Hera, maybe, early teens. So again, just well done, just very well done. Either of you have any other comments that you would like to add about this episode?
Curious to see what comes next. I don't think there's going to be a happy ending here or a good way out of this. Curious to see how the Bad Batch gets involved too, or if they get involved very much in the second episode. There's a little foreshadowing with a friendship between Hera and Omega, which I loved seeing. And I thought, hey, maybe these two could end up being friends. That would be nice. But we'll see.
Christina? Looks for.
I very much loved it. I'm looking at seeing how this. I love that Phil do everything all at once. So I think the pacing is really good. I'm very excited about this story be told with the Bad Batch. I also like having Crosshair back because he is part of the Bad Batch, and we haven't really been paying attention to what he's been doing, so that's been helpful as well. To be even more irritated with him is just to remind yourself that you're not necessarily rooting for him. He's really, really good at what he does. So we'll see how it goes.
Agreed. Again, great episode, lots of fun, and thank you everyone who's listened or watched. And until then, everyone stay safe, stay healthy, stay geeky, and we will see you next week. Thank you and take care.